between the lines. Got to read, got to read between the lines.
Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host Tom N.D.A.A. As always, we're very thankful you take the time from your busy day to join our program. Last week, folks, we had our guest on, Bill Flick. I know it was a very interesting show. Bill's a very interesting gentleman. He has been studying for years, actually decades, with regards to the money system and actually, as I like to say, the lack of a money system. Today, folks, we're going to cover some things, but one of the things that I wanted to cover, Stanley gave me a brochure, and there was an article done called Obama Codifies Indefinite Detention Without Trial for U.S. Citizens. That is literally the headline of this article. Obama codifies indefinite detention without trial for U.S. citizens. And the subtitle is National Defense Authorization Act could threaten religious people, pro-lifers, or anyone the government deems suspect. The author is a gentleman by the name of John Vennari, V-E-N-N-A-R-I. Now, what's interesting about this, folks, is that this document, I don't want to act like I'm promoting anything, but it's what you would generally come to be known as a religious pamphlet. All right, and usually if we find this kind of article, it's not done in this format. And what makes it so startling is that it is done in this format. The information I found to be correct and true, and the language is what I found startling. I think that somebody actually looked outside the box with this organization and looked at the N.D.A.A. and the trends of what's going on in our government, the John Defense Authorization Act, which, for example, which took away all of the control of the governors of the National Guards and reserves in their prospective states and gave it to the federal government, just to use it as a example. The Patriot Acts 1 and 2, where they could actually come into your house without a search warrant, and they can spy on you. They can put electronic devices in your house. They can do wiretapping without having to go to a judge, if you would. And I hate to be cynical, but whether to go to one of their corporate representatives and get permission from that corporate representative to go ahead and spy on you. They can come into your house without even leaving you a courtesy note saying we were there. They can take what they want for evidence without even notifying you that these items were taken and or recorded. We've gotten into programs like Echelon. And I invite you to go on the internet and punch in Echelon, and you will find out, folks, that all of your open air transactions and transitions, and in other words, if you're on a cell phone, this is all being recorded. And what they do is it goes to a computer bank, and if there's certain words put together, like example, let's just say bomb and president, if them words are in the same sentence or within a certain group of distance of language, then they actually, the computer red flags that and puts that into a program, and then it is reviewed by personnel of different government agencies. Folks, the powers to be are at the point here where there's two things that are really taking a big play. Number one, the lease on the Federal Reserve Act. As you know from watching this program, the Federal Reserve is a private for-profit corporation. And the other thing that you know from watching this program is that it was a 100-year lease, and the date of this 100-year lease, the Federal Reserve program, was put into play on December 23rd, 1913, while the Congress was away for the Christmas holiday. Now, it's a 100-year lease, folks. So do the simple math. This lease ends on December 22nd, 2013. We're not too far from the federal government actually having the ability to say yay or nay, above table here we're speaking, because below the table it's a dirty, dirty corporate game. But above table, to say, okay, we're done with the Federal Reserve System. It has not worked out. It's worked out very well for the bankers. Hasn't worked out too well for the American people, because what's gone on since the Federal Reserve Act? We've gone from having true constitutional, authentic dollars, and if you know from watching this program that we read verbatim to you the coinage acts, the different coinage acts of this country, but particularly the one of 1789 and so forth, where they stipulated what a dollar was. And a dollar was 25.8 grains of gold and a 15-to-1 ratio of silver. We don't have that anymore. What do we have now? We have legal tender. Folks, by the definition of money, we do not even have money, because money does not encompass debt. What else has taken place since the Federal Reserve Act? The purchasing power has gone from 100 cents down to, as of 2010, 4 cents. And as myself and Bill talked about last week, folks, we were talking about comparison of the loaf of bread. The loaf of bread has not changed. What's changed is the purchasing power of the medium of exchange to purchase, to take possession of that loaf of bread. What else has taken place? Well, since the Federal Reserve has taken over, we have had more span of war and less span of peace than in any 100-year period in the history of our nation. And that's saying something, because when you think about it, I'm talking about the founding era all the way to 1913. We've had a larger span of war, whether it be domestically or overseas. We have had a larger span of war and conflict, because we don't declare war no more, do we? All these things are just conflicts now. The Congress was the one who was responsible, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10, to control the issuance of our currency and the value thereof, and we had a thing called the gold discipline. It had to have intrinsic value of gold or silver. Well, who has all the gold and silver now, folks? The international bankers. They have confiscated the wealth of this nation. This is why, you know, when I was a child back in the late 50s and 60s, I remember some of the old timers, if you would, saying, well, let me see, you know, when they went out to get their dimes, nickels, and quarters and so forth, their change, if you would, they would say, oh, let me see what I have for silver. Because they, in their lifetime, were used to having silver coins. And if you go back, basically you can still purchase for silver value. For instance, in 1964 and before, our coins was made of 90% silver. There was intrinsic value behind the coins. What is it now? Now it's some alloy. It's a tin. There is no value to it. And what keeps this facade going is that you still use it and have faith in it as a mechanism, as a medium of exchange, which it doesn't have. We do not have control of our government because of this one simple root cause, because we lost control of our money system. We, number one, do not have a true money system, but number two, we lost control of it. You heard myself and Bill mention last week, which we've mentioned on this program many a time, the famous quote by Amschel Rothschild, when he says, "Give me control of a nation's money system, I care not who makes its laws." And the reason is, folks, is because if he controls the money system, the purchasing power, and the purse strings of any entity, whether it be a government, a non-government, corporation, non-corporation, it doesn't matter. He is in control of it because he controls the mechanisms of finance through that entity. It's really that simple. So what is going on with the mindset of what you perceive to be your government is that they are, through programs like the John Warner Defense Authorization Act, through creating crisis, yes, I did say that, through creating crisis such as 9/11 and the Gulf of Tonkin, the Lusitania, all the Pearl Harbor, all these things where, well, you can say, well, wait a minute. What do you mean they created Pearl Harbor? Didn't the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? Absolutely they did. Absolutely they did. But folks, the thing you got to understand about this is what you got to do is, and we've read this on the show before, is go on the internet and or go to your books and look up Harry Hopkins' 8-point plan to make Japan attack us. We had waged war against Japan through sanctions and so forth, just like we've done now with Iran. Okay? So basically, we cracked the Purple Code months prior to the Japanese attacking us. President Roosevelt was and the Joint Chiefs were very much aware the Japanese were going to attack us. They not only knew the location of where they were going to attack Pearl Harbor, but they also knew when the two fleets were leaving Tokyo and Hiroshima. They also, from cracking the Purple Code, knew where they were going to meet, and they came to the discovery that the merchant marine shipping lanes were going to be in the perspective of this rendezvous point. And so what Roosevelt did was he shifted the shipping lanes south so the Japanese could rendezvous from the north and attack Pearl Harbor. Don't believe me, look this up. Read the book Betrayal at Pearl. And there are many others. There are many others. Go on the internet and punch in Douglas Dietrich. He gets into this quite lengthy. You know, one thing I've always wondered about the Japanese was, why did they not come back for the third wave? They could have hit all our dry dock facilities. They could have hit all our fuel facilities. We basically had no more defenses on the island. Well, here's the reason why, folks. First of all, the Japanese commander, Admiral Yoshimoto, he came to the understanding that this was an ambush. Yes, I did say this was an ambush. They had taken the USS Utah, which was a battleship at the time, and you can look this up. They had actually, and I believe it was the Utah, but they had actually put a deck above it to make it look like an aircraft carrier, and that was one of the first flags when the reports came back in, when the second wave was going back out, and Yoshimoto said to himself, "Wait a minute, you know, this is a decoy." You know, if you're duck hunting, you put out decoys so you can draw in the other ducks. Well, it was the same thing. See, they had taken the aircraft carriers that were at Pearl Harbor and they brought them way out to sea, away from the attack. And you say, well, how do they know where the attack was coming, folks? I just explained it to you. We cracked the Purple Code, the Japanese Purple Code. We knew everything they were going to do. Okay? 9/11. Do you really think that 19 hijackers, you know, got the Defense Department to stand down, had the transcom code, so when the planes went into the Pentagon, the missiles that are automatically there to come up and would shut that plane down didn't activate themselves? Did they get the FBI to confiscate all the footage from the Pentagon, including the Marriott Hotel across the street, including the highway films that would have showed the plane coming across the highway, including the Citgo gas station that was across the street? Did the terrorists get the FBI? The terrorist was giving orders to the FBI to confiscate all these things? Who put all the explosions and secondary explosions that were inside the towers and the Pentagon? You have William Rodriguez. Go ahead and look him up. You know, he was down in the basements. He got blown upward seconds prior to the planes actually hitting the buildings. How did the 19 terrorists do all that? They didn't. How is it that 9 of the 19 terrorists have been confirmed alive, folks? I have interviews through documentaries that we've shown in this program with 7 of them. It's called the Hegelian dialectic. And this is what they do. They create a crisis to get the emotional response from the people. Then they bring in the methods to satisfy or quell the crisis that they created. Well, what's going on now, folks, let's do the full circle, is they have created crises through fomenting and funding of the Chinese Communist movement, the Bolshevik Revolution, and so forth. You remember we did a program on how we fund crisis, and we actually read to you verbatim how we financed the Nazi movement in Germany through the Brown Brothers Harriman Bank, Union Bank of New York. And we read to you verbatim through the government's own investigation of how the fund manager from the Union Bank of New York to the Reich Bank of Germany was a person by the name of Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. and the father of George Herbert Walker Bush. So this is a very, very interesting thing, folks, when you come to the understanding like what's going on in Afghanistan. We've been there for over a decade now. Afghanistan, they say, is stable. Afghanistan is not very stable, folks. It hasn't changed very much from when we were first there, but what has changed is we have taken control of the natural resources. We have the opium farms and farmers protected and producing opium at record levels right now. And if you don't believe me, I invite you to go to whatreallyhappened.com, and you can go in there, and there's a section there on Afghanistan, and you can click on that, and you will see U.S. Army soldiers not only patrolling the borders and within and without of the opium fields, but you will see U.S. Army soldiers and Marines actually packaging the opium. Now, some of you who still get your information from the mainstream media may remember, I forget his name. He did the big fake thing about being shot at in Afghanistan. And I apologize, folks, but he's a famous news broadcaster. I don't watch a lot of mainstream media, obviously. But what he did was he actually did a show on this. And what he did was he showed U.S. Army Special Forces paying Afghan farmers, because what had happened is we had mistakenly, and that is the language used, we had mistakenly damaged some of his poppy crops. And so he was there to pay him a remittance of money because of the fact that we had mistakenly destroyed a portion of his fields. So folks, and the reason why they said they have to do this is because of the fact that if they don't do it, the evil Taliban will be doing it. Folks, we shipped Al-Qaeda out of that country, and you can look this up on the internet. Just punch in U.S. military flies out thousands of Al-Qaeda troops to Pakistan. This was in the beginning of Afghanistan. All right? We Al-Qaeda folks within the CIA, you know what it's jokingly called? And the joke is on us. It's called Al-CIA, because Al-Qaeda was founded and funded currently today, and has been from its inception, by the CIA. Just as we've gotten into with you all these different organizations on previous shows that were funded either through the MI5, MI6, the ISI, the CIA, and so forth. Mossad. You know, Hamas was funded and founded by Mossad. Of course, let's remember the slogan of the Mossad: war through deception. Look it up. That is their slogan, their motto. So anyway, folks, I just wanted to briefly touch on these subjects, because this is what they do. They create crises, and now the crises that is being created actually has been going on since 1913, and now we're at the end game, if you would, of this crisis, and the crisis is economic and financial in nature. And what is going on, folks, is that if you look at the pigs, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, all we hear about every day in the media is basically that these entities are failing. They're being crushed by the level of debt of these countries. And folks, the only common denominator out of these countries is what? They're all controlled by foreign international bankers. The debt system itself is a fraud, but what people say is, how did we get into such debt? Well, folks, how we got into such debt was by losing control of our money system. You do not have a dollar in your pocket, but what you've perceived to be a dollar is basically a Federal Reserve note. Says it right on it. Federal Reserve note. That's why there's two signatures on the bottom of that note, my friends. One's a creditor, one's a debtor. All right? And if you don't believe there's a new world order, flip the thing over. Ask yourself, number one, what does Egyptian pyramids have to do with American history? And number two, look underneath it and you'll see a slogan that says, Novus Ordo Seclorum. And if you look this up, and you will see that novice, if you are a novice in something, you are what? You are new. Ordo is order, and seclorum is where we get the word secular from. And what does the word secular mean? Of the world. New order of the world, right on what you perceive to be a dollar, which is not a dollar. What you perceive to be money, which is not money, because money does not encompass debt by any law dictionary. Basically, folks, we, as I said to you, the National Tax Association is now saying that the average American is working till August 12th to pay their servitude to these international bankers. So what is going on is that we're at the end game. The lease is almost over, and I really believe that that is our linchpin to get out of this quagmire of debt, is to not redo the lease. But the other thing is that there is much unrest in our society. And as a matter of fact, folks, we're at the point where in the 60s there was a lot of unrest. Two reasons. One, there was a lot of transitions going on with regards to the foundation of our societies. Okay? The very fabric of our society is gone. If you look at what took place during the Great Depression, folks, even though people were starving and cold and homeless, there wasn't the crime that is taking place today in a supposed time of prosperity and everybody being fed. Of course, you have to look at yourself and say, well, Tom, if we were in such a Great Depression, where are the soup lines that were so evident back in the 1930s? Folks, the soup lines that are not so evident anymore because the soup line is in a government debit card that is being used as they go to your same grocery store that you go to. And instead of having to go to the physical soup line to get their food, they are just merely going right along with you in the grocery store line and using a debit card issued to them by the insolvent corporation that you know as the United States government. This is why there are no soup lines currently. But as things become more entangled in anger and frustration, and as more people start to really understand, or at least get a hint of the looting that's going on with our nation, with the lying that's going on with our representatives, and particularly with the deception that has gone on by the international bankers that control all of these mechanisms that burden us every day. What is going on is they've gone to the end game stage where, through programs such as the continuity of government, they are preparing for your unrest. And they've done this right along, folks. There's nothing new. You can go back to back when we had concentration camps in this country, and now we have what's called, as John Ashcroft, former Attorney General, called them, we have internment camps. Now, interesting choice of language here, because interment is to bury, to rid of. That's what the word interment means, to bury, to rid of. And they have internment camps. Don't say these camps don't exist, folks. I invite you to go on the internet. They're everywhere. I invite you to read the government's own teachings and writings and financial records, and you'll see that not only have these things been built, but now they're being funded to put into operational mode. I invite you to read what we're about to speak about, which is the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which just brings us right back to this article, which I'd like to share with you. And I want to read this pretty much verbatim, folks. It is a little bit of a lengthy article, but I very much believe that it is really, especially coming from the format that it's coming from, it really is quite startling to me that a publication of this nature would be so forthright and so deliberate of language as to what's going on. Igor Berman, a Soviet refugee who is now chief of staff to the California Representative Tom McClinton, wrote a December 21st article entitled, "Americans Should Fear New Detention Law." Speaking against the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act, folks, you know this as the N.D.A.A. Oh, and by the way, when did President Obama sign this act into play? When he was on vacation in Hawaii. Isn't that a beautiful thing? You're paying millions and millions of dollars, almost monthly now, for him and his family, and it's not just Obama, it's all of them, to go on vacation, and while he's on vacation, he's putting in legislation that is very detrimental to your future. Berman remembers living in dread in the Soviet Union, wherein Soviet secret police would pull up to a neighbor's house and whisk away innocent people who would never be seen again. Such was the abject terror of living in the claws of despotism, Berman writes. Unsurprisingly, it wasn't tempered by that infamous platitude, if you have, it wasn't tempered by that infamous platitude, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. How very different from a life in America secured from fear by the assurance of individual liberty. But in the 17 years since I became an American, we've been averting our gaze as these sacred assurances slowly waned. With passage this month of the N.D.A.A, we look away again as Congress exposes Americans to the specter of prison without charge, or trial and smothers, or charge or trial, and smothers that basic right of free citizens to invoke the law against their government. Berman warns of what the future might hold. Americans should know that, to eyes familiar with tyranny by experience, congressional consent to these broad new powers marks a major milestone on the road to serfdom. Before it is too late, let us resolve to reinvigorate our vigilance for freedom. On December 31st, while New Yorkers' celebrations and the impending Iowa caucus distracted the country, Barack Obama, quietly, Barry Soetoro, whatever name you want to use for the guy, quietly signed the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act from his holiday haven in Hawaii. Isn't that beautiful? You think he's laughing at you? Of course, they're all laughing at us. But I want you to think of this. You're paying for him and his family to go on the most lavish, one of the most lavish vacation spots in all of the world, on your penny, on your sweat equity. And what does he do while he's doing that? He signs a bill to restrict your liberties and take away constitutional, foundational law that made this country. Think of that. You should be outraged at that. I'll tell you one thing. If I was him, I'd be laughing, as I'm sure he is. I'm sure the people that he works for, and I'm not talking about you, because he doesn't work for you. I'm talking about the international bankers that he works for, are laughing right along with him. Having toast of cognac or whatever, and just laughing at how gullible and apathetic and how cowardly the American people, through their programs, have become. The N.D.A.A, a $662 billion measure approved by Congress, authorizes counterterrorism spending through fiscal year 2012 and regulates the detention, interrogation, and prosecution of suspected terrorists. Folks, we did a whole show on who are the terrorists now. Remember this show? Let's just go through it real quick. Constitutionalists were a terrorist. Returning veterans. Yes, we read it verbatim. Returning veterans were terrorists. People with more than 30 days worth of food in their house were terrorists. But that changed this, folks. The N.D.A.A brought that down to 7 days. If you have more than 7 days worth of food in your house for your family, you are a terrorist. Don't believe me? Look it up. Better yet, go on the internet and punch in Rand Paul's N.D.A.A. speech on the Senate floor. He gets into that quite lengthy. All right, Rand Paul being the senator's son of Ron Paul. Okay, so who are the terrorists? The whole time, this thing, as we've gone over all these years in this program, this whole thing is geared to you. You are the terrorist. Do you have more than 7 days worth of food in your house? You're a terrorist. Okay, let's continue here. This bill also contains provisions that effectively abolish the United States Bill of Rights. It grants dictatorial power to the president to order the military arrest of U.S. citizens on U.S. soil and detain them for an indefinite period. Did you hear this? Of course, we read this verbatim to you on a previous show, but let's do this again. The bill contains provisions that effectively abolish the United States Bill of Rights. It grants dictatorial power to the president to order the military to arrest of U.S. citizens on U.S. soil and detain them for an indefinite period. The measure of the law are scheduled to go into effect 60 days after the signing of the bill. Obviously, these provisions are in act. Through the N.D.A.A., the entire United States has been redefined as a battlefield. And we read this language to you verbatim, and that's exactly what it says, folks. The United States is now a battlefield. And why is it a battlefield? Because, folks, you're the enemy. And don't think I'm being ridiculous here. If you've been watching this program along with us, we read verbatim to you the Trading with the Enemy Act amended in 1933 from the original Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917. And what they did, folks, is they changed the definition of enemy. If you remember, we read it verbatim, that the American people were now the enemy of the United States government. Of course, it's because the government was taken over in 1933 on March 9th. Senate Document 93-549, we read almost that. We did two shows. We read that document to you verbatim for 2 hours. And some of the things that were in there was that all property is in the state. You remember that whole clause? We read that whole to you. But also we read to you how the United States government changed the definition of enemy and declared the people of the United States the enemy. Again, look that up. Trading with the Enemies Act of 1933 as amended from the 1917 Trading with the Enemies Act. Through the N.D.A.A., the entire United States has been redefined as a battlefield wherein the military can arrest a suspected terrorist or undefined belligerent. Now, there's a broad word. Am I a belligerent because I'm up here reading verbatim legislation from their own sources? Are you a belligerent because you go to your town hall and stand in front of the selectmen with genuine concerns about different issues about your town? Are you a belligerent because you went down to the State House and joined in peaceful protest and gathering about one issue or another? Yes, you are. Yes, you are. How dare you speak up? That, my friends, is why they put the word belligerent into the act. They don't want an educated, active people. They want an ignorant, apathetic people. And the reason why they're preparing the way they are with these programs like the continuity of government and so forth is because some of you are beginning to wake up. And some of you are actually beginning to ask questions. Not a lot of you, but some of you are. And some of you are starting to organize and have effect against the big corporatism that currently is controlling all the mechanisms of our government. including our military. You know, I listened to a gentleman speak last week on actually a local radio program out of Island Pond, and the gentleman said something very interesting. What he said was that basically he called our military resource the resource extrication group. And I thought of them words. I said, it's perfect. It's exactly what they are. Folks, you know, what's the paraphrase we always use? Oh, they're fighting for our freedom. First of all, I ask you quite bluntly, what freedom are you talking about? You're now working to August 12th of this year to pay for your freedom. You can't but build a house without their permission and paying them for that permission. Is that freedom? You don't have the right to travel. You don't have the right to travel by any means without their permission and their license. You don't have the right to work without their license and their permission. You don't have the right to build a septic system so you can use the toilet in your own house without them telling you how to do it, where to do it, and you're going to pay them to do it, and you must have their permission. So when you say to me they're fighting for our freedom, I'd like to ask you particularly what freedom is it that was threatened by the Taliban in Afghanistan or Saddam Hussein in Iraq? What threat were they to my freedoms? I see all of the threats to what little freedoms I have left coming from within. And I understand the control mechanisms of that detriment to my freedom is not the dog and pony show that most Americans watch on TV. The threat to our freedoms, my friends, comes from entities that control the puppets on the dog and pony show that you take for as the leaders of the government. Folks, the government is an insolvent corporation. They will tell you that. That is in the congressional record. That is in international documents, the IMF and so forth. That is in the Federal Reserve's own writing. That is in the United States government's own writing. I invite you to look up a gentleman by the name of Congressman Jim Traficant out of Ohio. He gave a rousing speech on the congressional floor about the bankruptcy of the United States. I'm not making this up. This is documented evidence that, number one, the United States government is a corporation, and you can go back to the Organic Act of 1871, which is when they actually formed the corporation that you know as the United States. And this is why we have two constitutions. And I know we've got into this. Some of you have watched the program before. I don't want you to be bored or think I'm being redundant here, but most people turn their heads when I say there's two constitutions. No, Tom, there's only one constitution. First of all, you have to ask yourself, is either one of them constitutions in effect today? As George Bush called the Constitution while he was president of the United States, something that he swore to defend, that, and I quote, the Constitution is just a GD piece of paper. Don't believe me, look it up. He was president of the United States and he said that. So there are two constitutions. One of them is known as the Constitution for the United States, where the U is small. And the U is small, my friends, because of basic English. It is an adjective describing that the states are united. It is an action. It's an adjective describing the action of the noun, which is the capital S states. Again, Constitution for the United States, small u. And then after the Civil War, and after the Organic Act of 1871, and after the Lieber Codes, we have the Constitution of the United States, and the U is large. And the reason why the U is large is because it is now a noun, a person, a place, or a thing. And that thing is a for-profit corporation. And the word of is a possessionary word. The Constitution of the United States, large U. Person, place, or thing. It's a noun. It's not an adjective describing that the states were united in action. It is a noun describing the corporation. And folks, this is where the whole spectrum of inferior and superior position got flip-flopped. Because if you look at the founding documents, literally, and I know we can't say the G word, but it was God, people, state, federal. It wasn't federal, state, people, and we won't even talk about God. So what's going on, and this is the mechanisms that they use to flip-flop your standing position with your relations to the government. This is when it took place. So now the government sees, or the bankers see the serfs getting restless. The serfs are getting restless. So what must we do? We must create crises to finance domestic security forces, and we must create crises so that the people will welcome these implementations of authority, even though it takes away their liberties and their freedoms and their own power to make decisions regarding the benefit of their lives and the lives of their family. And they welcome this. And they welcome this. And they will welcome this just as the people of Rome, as the people of Germany, as the people of Argentina, and so many societies and nations through history that have made the mistake of losing control of their money system, or as I say today, their lack of the money system. Okay, let us continue with this article. So again, through the N.D.A.A., the entire United States has been redefined as a battlefield wherein the military can arrest a suspected terrorist or undefined belligerent and send him to a military prison indefinitely without charge and without trial. Obama stated that he had reservations about the aspect of this bill, but merely promised that his administration would not use the extreme power. Isn't that funny? And he signs it while he's on holiday on your payday. How do you like that? Really, really something. President Obama's actions today is a blight on his legacy because he will forever be known as the president who signed indefinite detention without trial into law, said Anthony D. Romero, executive director of the ACLU. Now, isn't that interesting? Even the ACLU is saying, you know, folks, the ACLU is telling you that with them studying this, and they're usually pretty much against the Constitution, they're very much part of the divide paradigm, but they're even saying that this is unconstitutional and the severity of the language of this bill. Excuse me. The N.D.A.A., he continues, the N.D.A.A. contains no geographic limitations and allows the president to indefinitely detain even American citizens. The bill places enormous power in the hands of future presidents, and the only answer the president has to say is, trust me. Once any government has the authority to hold people indefinitely, the risk is that it can be almost impossible to rein in such power. I agree with that statement. And again, this Kenneth Roth, executive director of the Human Rights Watch, says, and pretty much following up with the statement made by Anthony D. Romero, that President Obama will go down in history as the president who enshrined indefinite detention without trial against United States citizens in U.S. law. Folks, I don't believe a word of that. I agree that there may be a few like myself that will remember, but the average American is going to remember him as, oh, the first black president, which I have a lot of questions about that. How about maybe the first foreign president? We can probably remember him as that, the first foreign president of the United States. Okay. And then, of course, they get into this whole thing, who's for this, Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham. Now, Lindsey Graham, folks, if you remember, Lindsey Graham, I believe from South Carolina, he was the one who was appointed chairman of the Bank and Currency Committee that Ron Paul was to have. And when Lindsey Graham wound up being on his acceptance speech, he said that there are those, I'm paraphrasing, there are those in Washington that believe that we are here to serve the people. I believe that to serve the people, we are here to serve the banks. I read that verbatim to you. That was quite a while ago. All right. Gee, I wonder why Ron Paul didn't get that position, huh? It is not unfair to make an American citizen account for the fact that they decided to help Al-Qaeda to kill us all and to hold them as long as it takes to find intelligence about what may be coming next. And when they say, I want my lawyer, you tell them, shut up. You don't get a lawyer. This is Lindsey Graham. I want to read this again to you. This is necessary in the war on terror, Graham said. It is not unfair to make an American citizen account for the fact that they decided to help Al-Qaeda to kill us all and hold them as long as it takes to find intelligence about what may be coming next. And when they say, folks, you are the they, I want my lawyer, you tell them, shut up, you don't get a lawyer. Senator Lindsey Graham. So, folks, just with that simple statement and just with the language of this bill, who's the real threat to your freedom here? Is it some guy who needed dialysis every 4 days who supposedly orchestrated 9/11 from a cave in Bora Bora, Afghanistan? Come on. I know you're not that gullible. You know, and I know a lot of you are starting to wake up to the fact that 9/11 was an inside job. But you've got to understand, folks, that all of this legislation, the National Defense Authorization Act, Patriot Acts, Homeland Security Acts, the N.D.A.A. from 2002 all the way up to 2012, are all fomented on the facade of 9/11. Okay, now this is Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. And I mentioned him earlier. If you go on the internet, and he gave a scalding speech about this act. But let's listen to what he had to say. There are laws in the books now that characterize who might be a terrorist. Someone missing fingers on their hands is a suspect according to the Department of Justice. Someone who has guns, someone who has ammunition that is weatherproofed, someone who has more than 7 days of food in their house. Folks, he is reading verbatim from the bill. I'm not making this up. I know before it was 30 days, and we read that through the MIAC reports and some other things. Actually, that goes all the way back to Janet Reno's, Bill Clinton's Attorney General. It goes all the way back to there, where if you had more than 30 days worth of food in your house, you were considered a terrorist, and that's before 9/11. They've been using this terrorist game for a long time, my friends. As a matter of fact, you go back and you study some of Mussolini's, El Duce, from Italy when he came into power. You go back and you study some of Adolf Hitler's, the Führer, from Germany during them times. You go back and you study Mao Zedong, the premier of China. And you will see one common language, folks: terrorist. You are a terrorist. Let's read this again. Rand Paul is reading verbatim, my friends. There are laws on the books now that characterize who might be a terrorist. Someone missing fingers on their hands is a suspect, according to the Department of Justice. Someone who has guns. Someone who has ammunition that is weatherproofed. Someone who has more than 7 days of food in their house can be considered a potential terrorist. If you are a suspect of these activities, do you want the government to have the ability to send you to Guantanamo Bay for an indefinite detention period? Ask that question to yourself. Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Dianne Feinstein backed Paul's obligation. And this really shocked me, that this woman, knowing how she has been through her political career, of course, there's a lot of people in sections of California, particularly in her district, that are very upset about this bill. So she may be just serving platitudes to her congressional constituents and so forth. Congress is essentially authorizing the indefinite detention of American citizens without charge. We are now a nation that locks up its citizens without charge. Folks, there are more people incarcerated in the United States of America than any other country in the entire world, and that includes the evil empire of Russia, and that includes China. Don't believe me? Look it up. What is the number one growing industry in the United States right now? Security forces. As all the blue-collar jobs, as all the jobs of trade and commerce are leaving our nation because of acts like GAFTA and GATT and NAFTA and all these things, as we finance our own demise. What they are filling the void with, my friends, is a police state. You heard Bill Flick speak of last week about the fact that down just south of White River Junction on Interstate 91, they're building a facility right off the highway there. Folks, you can get on the internet right now and you can punch in the fact that the TSA, you know, the people who fondle you and feel you up when you go to travel on the airports, are now actively, of course, we read this to you 2.5 years ago, are now actively in the bus stations in Houston, Texas. And you're going to start to see them in bus stations throughout the country. You're going to start to see them at public events like, well, the NFL is right in step with the New World Order. You know, that's one thing I was noticing the other day when I was, I don't watch a lot of TV, but I was watching, they had this big special on the 100-year anniversary of Fenway Park. And I thought it was interesting that as the people were entering Fenway Park, they weren't being, you know, tapped down, they weren't being searched and so forth. But you go to any NFL football game, and I was a season ticket holder to the New England Patriots for 24 years, and I will tell you the reason why I left was because I was tired of people groping me as I went into the football game. And the NFL is right in step with the New World Order. But anyway, folks, I want to just get into basically what this N.D.A.A. is and ask yourselves, because for the sake of time, you know, we've got people from different sides of the divide paradigm. We got the ACLU, we got Senators Dianne Feinstein and Rand Paul, we have Human Rights Watch and so forth, all these organizations that are completely on the different spectrum of the divide paradigm, and they are telling you what? They are telling you that your liberties are being, and your freedoms are being threatened, not from some foreign source, but right here at home domestically. Folks, we have got to awaken to the understanding that our government is in trouble. You know, some people may think that I am anti-government. Believe it or not, folks, I am very much pro-government. I am not an anarchist. I know that we need the rule of law, and we need a government to not rule the people, but to work with the people. But the responsibility is on the people for the means and the mechanisms and the ways of their government. And that's why when we close this program, we close always thanking you for watching this program, but we always close reminding you that your government is your responsibility. We thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed the program, and we invite you to get on the internet, go to the library, do your own research, study this N.D.A.A., and you will see that the language is not only compelling, it's very, very scary. Folks, thank you for watching, and again, we close reminding you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you for watching.
read between the lines.